Marnie Beauchamp. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm great. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear. I'm
Yeah.
excited to dive into our conversation today to get to know yourself a little bit better and go into depth on the discussion that we're going to have. But before we do, can you give the listeners a bit of context about who you are and what it is that you do?
Oh, wow. Who I am. Okay. So I have been a business owner since I was in my 20s. So I had an opportunity to buy into a business at that stage. And that's pretty much what began my journey through the business world. I am now a published author. So I published my first book late last year. So it's only quite fresh, but it's been going incredibly well. So we've reached bestseller status on a number of different categories on Amazon, which is super
Congratulations.
exciting. Thank you. Yeah, besides that, I'm a mum and these days more of a coach than a real estate agent, which is what my history's been in business.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
you're wearing a fair amount of hats by the sound of it.
Yes, I am. Also got an app in development too, so I suppose that makes me a developer as well.
And what leads you to choose all of these different ventures and different things that you go down? Because when you speak to a lot of mentors and business coaches, and I imagine you speak to a lot of your clients, a lot of the advice you hear is to stick with one thing, place as much energy and attention on it as possible. And maybe once you start to get confident or you see a decent amount of success, then maybe dip your toe into something new and see if you can navigate that. But quite often the advice is to stick with this one thing, whereas you're dipping your foot in this and this and this and seems to be doing pretty well at it as well. So what is the formula that you've used and why is that the path that you've gone down specifically?
I think I have stuck to one thing for a number of years when I was operating my real estate agencies. However, I'm definitely diversifying a lot nowadays. For me, I think I am always open to opportunity. I don't ever like to compartmentalize myself and what I'm doing. So if an opportunity presents itself, and that's something that's kind of a bit of a theme throughout my book, is that I believe that those opportunities, a lot of them come to us for a reason. So I'm very big on, those sliding door moments, making decisions that, could change your life. And so quite often I will take those opportunities and run with them and see where they lead me. Yeah, I think at the moment, all of the hats are kind of within the same realm still. So yeah, it's working for me.
Got you.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And it's nice to hear. It's refreshing because that's not the usual narrative whatsoever. So it's nice to hear someone who says that you can do a little bit more. Obviously, like you said, within real estate, you really place your attention there to begin with.
Yes.
Got yourself into a very, very good position, but then look to transition and pivot, which is also
Yes.
another amazing thing. Because once you start to get good at things, then you don't even want to pivot because you're like, well, I've got a lot of success here. So now, I have to start from scratch again. And once you start to be an authority in your field, then it's actually quite hard to transition. So that's pretty amazing as well. But before we go forward, I want to go back. So
Okay.
you mentioned that you really started within business. That was your first opportunity in your early 20s. But if we roll back the years even more, what would your teenage years and the early years of your life tell us about who you are today? What things went on? I find that usually there's a little bit of a childhood puzzle that links us to who we are today. So what things went on in your childhood that led you to all of these different things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis now?
Yeah, I think it definitely has a big impact. So I grew up with two brothers and I was very close to my dad. And my dad was a real adrenaline junkie. So from a very early age, I was doing everything that my brothers and my dad did. So I was racing go-karts, I was riding dirt bikes, I was water skiing at 5 years old. We were snow skiing, all of those very, I guess, boys activities I was up there and involved in. So I became a high achiever, I think, from a very early age. I played basketball at a very high level, so Australian championships and state championships levels as a child and into my teenage years. And then being close to my dad, I was obviously spending a lot of time with him, and he bought a business, his first business, when I was about 12 years old. And I used to spend weekends and school holidays always hanging out with him at work. And I think that is what was the biggest impetus for me in wanting to have my business. So in high school, when people would say, what do you want to do when you grow up? For me, it was always, I want to have my own business. I didn't know doing what at the time, obviously, but real estate definitely wasn't on the agenda. That was just a door that opened for me at some point. And I took it, and here I am today.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So that was pretty embedded into you from a very, very young age, and obviously led you to where you were today as well, which is fantastic. And obviously, all the things we've spoken about so far seem, beautiful and all sunshines and rainbows. But something that's mentioned a lot in your book and your story, full stop, are some of the hidden struggles that many of us go through, especially business owners and especially people who also experience a fair amount of success. It's very easy to see the person who maybe went through a business failure or X, Y, or Z and ends up with a lot of very, very visible challenges. But when you look at someone who's maybe acquired a decent amount of success in their life, you're almost thinking, well, it does all look good. And I always think of the analogy, and I've said this to people that many times in my life, I've been like the duck floating on the top of the water, but my feet have been going
100%.
like 100 miles per hour. Yeah, so I definitely feel you there. And 100%. And I would love to know a little bit more about some of your hidden struggles along the way, because of naturally success doesn't come without any challenges that come along the way. But I understand you went through a pretty decent amount to get to where you were. So can you take us through that story?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, because I'm one of those people that keeps things quite bottled up. And so it's, I was exactly as you said, the duck floating on the water, and people didn't see the turmoil underneath the water for me to continually keep swimming. So there was a number of things. There was obviously a lot of health issues, because when you put your body through continual stress and anxiety and grief and all that sort of thing, that manifests into physical illness, in my opinion. So there was a lot of physical stuff that I had to, big surgeries and things that I had to undergo over the years. I went through a very big court case when I sold my first business so basically in 1 year, just to give you a little bit of perspective, and this is just one of the things, I went through divorce. My kids were only very young when my husband and I separated. I went through financial ruin due to a court case when I decided to sell my business to spend more time with my kids. And then my dad, who had obviously been very close to me all my life and was my mentor, passed away very suddenly at 58. So that was all within the 1 year. So I had to find some way, obviously, to pick up the pieces and start again. I had a choice whether I could just stay there and go and get a job and then just try and, manage life as best I could, or get up and keep moving forward and do it all again. And so obviously I decided that that wasn't going to be my life, and it wasn't going to be the life of my daughters. So I got up and I started all over again, and as a single mum, and did that for, many, many years, trying to juggle everything. I had sole custody. So I was pretty much full-time mum, as well as building a business and, having to overcome all of those mental challenges, as well as the financial challenges and everything along the way. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. How many years ago was that?
So that was in 2005, early 2005, the court case started, and then it finished it was nearly 6 months. It was 6 months of I can't even explain how hard it is. If anybody's been through a big court case like that, they'll understand. But just the mental and physical drain on being dragged into court every day and having to go through that process of defending yourself is not good. And I didn't actually do anything wrong. That was the worst part. But if somebody charges you, so the claim against me was for damages for selling my business to a different franchise, basically, which I was within my rights to do. But I still had a few months left on my franchise agreement, which is, again, not a limiting factor normally. So you just pay the average of your franchise fees that you have paid throughout the time with the franchise, and then you obviously can sell the property, the business. However, yeah, there was a number of factors leading up to that within the franchise that basically I think I was a final straw. So I
can imagine.
But it was hard.
Yeah.
It took everything. I was sitting in the park with my kids one day and they wanted an ice cream. I had $1.76 in my bank account. I couldn't even buy them an ice cream. So when I say I hit the skid days, I completely had, after selling my property, I came out of the court case. I had to put my company into voluntary administration to stop it in the end because I had nothing. And I had a choice as to whether I completed the bankruptcy forms that I'd started filling out and I let the company go into liquidation, or I don't. And I repay every cent to the barristers and the accountants and the solicitors and everything that I had along the way. And so that was a decision I made. I didn't fill out the bankruptcy forms. I didn't want anybody else to suffer, financial hardship either from what had happened. So I made the decision to repay all of the debt completely. It took me nearly 5 years, I think it was, in the end. And even just to buy my company back was over $100,000. So I was definitely going backwards, and I was in the red big time. But I think that's something that I'm most proud of, is that I didn't take the easy road out, that I took the hard road, but morally it was the right thing to do. And it gave me, again, I worked so hard to get to that point, but it gave me that strength and confidence when I opened the next business, once I was kind of debt free, that, if I could do that and get through that, then this business is just going to fly now. I had so many learnings from that first time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you speak a lot about resilience as well, and how that's such an important trait and asset that you possess, and you also speak about as well. I'm sure there was many moments in which it would have been more tempting to go down the route of what seems easier in that moment. What kept you going? I mean, resilience is something that we talk about, and it's kind of like a nice word as well. Like, it's quite motivating. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to be resilient. I'm going to push through. But, outside of the motivational quotes and the videos you see on Instagram, like, resilience when you're actually going through something really, really challenging is usually not the thing that you want to exercise. You do it because maybe there's a long-term reward, but there's nothing beautiful or sexy about it in the short term. There really isn't. So when it came to you being resilient all through that time, like you said, it took you 5 years to pay everything back. What did that look like? How did you gather the strength to keep on going,
It was hard, and I definitely had moments, and I definitely took some time to lick my wounds, so to speak. But unfortunately for me, I just had that. Well, not unfortunately, it's fortunately, really. I had that inner, it's like this intrinsic thing that I can't give up. I never have, and I never want to. So it was a decision that I made, as I said, where I could just stay where I was, or I could do it all again and do it better. And I think I found the strength and the resilience through, obviously, my daughters. They were very young at the time, and I didn't want that to be their life. I didn't want them to have a mum who gave up. I didn't want them to have a mum who, couldn't provide the best life possible for them. So they were definitely my why. And I think that when you're going through really tough times, what you need to do is look at the bigger picture, look at what you want your life to be. And nobody wants to stay in that place, right? If you're going through some trauma and you're, sad every day and you're hurting and you're going through grief and all that kind of thing, I think it's important to lead into those feelings, because I think the only way that we can process them is to actually acknowledge them and go through that pain. But I think the sooner that you do that, the sooner you're able to go, okay, I'm done. I've felt it. It hurt, but I don't want to stay in that place. I don't want to keep reliving this over and over again. So I think my resilience came from the bigger picture purpose of what I wanted my life to be, and that was being the best mum I could. But it was also, proving to myself and to everybody else as well for a long time, until I realized that it's only me that I have to prove anything to, but to prove that that's not what my life is going to be defined as. So there's always bigger and better, and there's always another day. And it's literally our choice as to whether we want to stay in a situation. Nobody's going to come and rescue us. I'm a big believer in not putting it onto anybody else to fix things for you. You're the only person that can do it. So it's a matter of making that decision to get up and to keep moving forward. You have to make the choice not to be in that situation anymore.
And you mentioned that never give up mentality is kind of part of your makeup. Did you ever have a moment? Obviously, it's much, much easier, and people say this to me all the time, to speak about some of the values that you live by when you're in a much better space, right?
Yes.
Comparatively to when you're going through the hardships.
Yes.
So did you always have those values within you when you're like personal responsibility, like I take account of everything? I know you mentioned that never give up one was kind of deeply embedded to you.
Yeah.
Was part of this written into your DNA and your character, maybe from your upbringing, and was part of it developed along the way? How did you get these set of values that you live by, because I think it's a really important thing. If people are listening right now, maybe they go through hardships, but they're kind of outsourcing the responsibility, looking at everyone else, kind of in that victim mentality, but don't really realize it, then they're going to struggle to get out of it. However, if they're able to instill some of those values that you're speaking so strongly about, I feel that they have a much, much better opportunity of getting through it. So where did the value side of things and those rules that you live by come into play?
Well, I think you're always brought up in an environment where everybody works hard and everybody, took responsibility to a certain extent. But I also think that you have to acknowledge that, like I definitely went through stages where I was thinking that the universe was conspiring against me and all that kind of thing, and why me and whatever. But it was really limited, because I think I've always had that. I don't know whether it was brought up in me or whether it was something that, I developed over the years, but I've always had that understanding that emotions and feelings are things. They're not part of us. And so we can control them. And it's hard. Like I'm not saying any of this was easy. It was hard. And the emotional roller coasters I've been on over the years are pretty insane. But I don't know. I think people just have to realize that it is temporary. I think that's the biggest thing, is that no matter what you're going through, it's only going to continue if you keep reliving it and you keep staying in that moment. And we have to eventually let go of the past, as hard as it is. And I know how hard it is, but we have to move on, and we have to create a life that we want to be in, because we are the only ones that can do it. It's not up to anybody else to make us happy. It's up to us to find ways to be happy, and even if you're not happy, for me, walking down the street with a smile on my face and saying hello to people makes me feel happy. So that kind of changes my energy through the day. But yeah, it's hard, and you're always going to have hard times. You're always going to have times where you want to give up. There's no doubt about it. I mean, life is hard, business is hard, everything's hard. But I think that you just have to somehow find a way to keep moving forward. And even if it's baby steps, even if it's crawling, even if it's the smallest little thing. So, each day you wake up and you think to yourself, what is something that I'm going to do today that's going to make me feel good and it's going to move me forward, even if it's just a tiny little bit. And for some people, that's just getting up and going for a 10-minute walk. And that's okay. It's just finding and continually looking for opportunities to do things that are going to make you feel better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that we underestimate those small steps. But
Absolutely.
when they compound and when they're done over day and day and day and day, like that's the true success. Of course, when people are taking big steps, it's not necessarily because they took that big step from day one. It's because they started with the smallest step possible, and now their big step is their small step, right? But
Absolutely.
if you try to do that from day one, you'd probably trip up. So talk to me a little bit more about your comeback, right? You're off the back of 2005. I imagine the court case is closed, the divorce is processed, and you're there with your $1.97 in your pocket. Like, what is going through your mind? And how are you beginning the comeback? How do we go from, Marnie who's on the floor and this life is conspiring against us to where you are today, essentially?
Definitely one step at a time. It was a very overwhelming process, because not only was I suffering from immense grief over losing my dad. It's very traumatic when you lose somebody suddenly like that. 1 minute they're there, the next minute they're just gone. You kind of say goodbye. So there was that. There was the fact that I've got two little girls, relying on me. They were just 3 and 5 at the time. And I knew that, obviously as a mum, I had that mum guilt because I wanted to be with them as well. And the reason I was selling the business was so that I could actually spend some time with them. And that didn't happen. So I had to go back to work. And so the people that I sold my business to, I was actually, part of the contract was that I came with it for a couple of years. So I was contracted to them. I couldn't work anywhere else anyway if I wanted to. So I went back and I literally started from scratch and went back to basics. I just thought I can't step back in where I was because I don't have the mental capacity, but also because I didn't have the energy, and so much had happened in between. I'd lost confidence. There was a whole range of things happening inside. So I went back to basics and I just sat down and I thought, okay, where do I need to start? and what do I need to do to get myself back on track and back to where I was previously. So I broke it down. I think that everybody has goals, and a lot of people set big goals, which I've always believed in, obviously. But for me, the trick to actually achieving your goals is to break it down into bite-sized pieces. And especially if you're coming off the back of some hardship and some setbacks, I think if you go in all guns blazing, like I'm going to be back where I was in a month's time or even a year's time, it's too high an expectation. And that's when most people don't get there. So what you have to do is break it down into daily, break it down into yearly, 6 monthly, monthly, weekly, and daily activities. And I always sat every day and said, right, what 3 things can I do today that's going to get me back into the rhythm and the habits and all that sort of thing that I needed to be back in. So that's literally what I did. I just broke it down so I didn't have to think about the bigger picture. I didn't even have to think a week ahead because it was too overwhelming. I couldn't even think a week ahead. I had to think of getting through that day and what that day was going to look like for me. And I found that by doing that and not having too long a vision, it actually enabled me just to focus on those small steps, which is all I felt I could do. And once I mastered them, that gave me the confidence the next day to go, okay, well, I actually got through yesterday and I managed to do those things that I really wanted to do. So what's the next stage? What's the next thing I'm going to do? And each time you do that, you build resilience, you build strength, and you build confidence and belief in yourself because you're actually doing the things that you don't think you can. And to me, that's where true strength and resilience comes from. It's actually doing the things that you don't think you can do, not the things you think you can do. So, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's very, very underrated to set goals which are just kind of out of your reach, but are still achievable. And to have that self-awareness to not set super, like, obviously, like you said, set your big goal out in the future.
Yes.
But I think so many people overestimate what they can do in a day, but underestimate what they can do in 5 or 10 years. And I think that if we turn that around to you breaking it down, like you said, into the small chunks and just ticking the box every single day, you don't have to, go 10 out of 10. But if you're 8 out of 10 on a day-to-day basis, and you're consistent,
yes,
it allows you to build momentum and move on to those next steps. And I think it's very underrated. And you speak a lot about momentum as well. I imagine that you gathered a lot of momentum off the back of taking it day by day, week by week, month by month. At which point did you turn around and thought, well, this is starting to come together. I'm starting to feel much, much better now. And you're like, okay, I'm on my way to something special. At which point did you kind of have that tipping point, or even if it wasn't a tipping point, maybe it was just a gradual process? Or did you have that stage where you were like, yeah, things are going well again, and I can see a brighter future in front of me?
Yeah, so I think it was a day-to-day basis. And it's interesting that you mentioned momentum because for me, momentum is so much more important than motivation because we're not always motivated. And I wasn't motivated in the slightest to be sitting in that office every day. But I knew that momentum would build motivation. So yeah, it was definitely an ongoing thing. However, I had been the number one agent in the area and things like that. And so, to go back to like literally starting from scratch was a hard thing, mentally as well. But I think the point...
How did your ego handle it?
Yeah, it was everything. It was my confidence, my ego, my belief. It was, the perception within the community. Mind you, not many people knew about the court case, but they just knew that I had disappeared all of a sudden, and then I had reappeared. But I think the tipping point where I thought, yeah, I got this was within the real estate industry, like most industries, you do rankings and awards and things like that. And the franchise that I was with, I'd sold my business to, was one of the largest in Australia. And after the first full year that I was back, so it was about maybe 18 months in, I got to the point where I was number 12 in the state. And so I think that was a point where I kind of went, you know what, I can do this and I've got this. And I stopped at that point. I started to actually acknowledge where I'd been and where I'd gotten to, whereas along the way I wasn't doing that. I was just so focused on just getting through every day. But once my goal had been top 10, so I didn't quite get there at that point. But anyway, but it's still a big accomplishment considering where I'd come from.
That's it, especially considering you had to go back to relatively ground zero again.
Yes.
And build yourself back up. But I think that's the beautiful thing about acquiring skills as well. I think that's another thing that maybe I'd like you to speak on as well is that when people go through these hardships, yes, you know, you might have failed in your business, or you might have had something taken away from you, or you might have gone through some hardships. But at the end of the day, if you spent years developing those skills, no one takes them away from you. And
Absolutely.
quite often, a lot of skills are transferable, even if it's not the skill itself, right? If you're an amazing real estate agent, that might make you an incredibly good communicator for a new business that you're going to start going into, even if it has nothing to do with property or anything along those lines. So talk to me about the power of skills. And obviously that was something that you probably relied on a lot to get yourself back into the place of not just miss out on the top 10, but you got yourself into 12th place, which I think is still pretty damn good. So tell us about the aspect of skills and why they were so important to your comeback as well.
Yeah. Skills are everything really, because that's what sets the groundwork for you. That gives you that opportunity to be able to complete your tasks, is having the skills. And if again, if they're a bit tarnished and things like that, then I always say to people, I mean, I'm open to learning every day. I'm one of those people that always go to conferences, always go to learning programs and do lots of training and stuff, even after being in the industry for 28 years. So for me, I was open to going to as many courses and things as I could within that group. And I did a lot of training to enhance the skills that I already had. But yeah, if you've got the skills, you can always fall back on that, as you said. And, as I said, for me, opportunities and sliding door moments where things open up, I've had to or chosen to shift careers and things. But for me, it was just, that's fine. I'll just build new skills, develop new skills. So yeah, learning and having skills is a massive, massive step to any goal, really.
Yeah, and I think a big thing you mentioned there is that you've been in the industry for 28 years, but you're still willing to learn.
Yes,
and I
totally.
think that that's something that a lot of us leave behind, right? We start to develop a sense of, like I said earlier, authority, maybe ego to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
What can I actually learn at this point, and all these other things that come in. And then we end up getting a little bit too comfortable and almost then stop learning. So if you've got the skill of maintaining becoming a learner, then that makes you even more unstoppable, because it doesn't matter where you go next, because if you have that skill of learning, you can essentially learn anything to a somewhat decent degree at the very, very least.
Yes, totally agree.
Amazing. And one other thing that I know you speak a lot about is not necessarily setting goals, but setting standards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to get your take on that, because it was an interesting thing that I came across when I was reading about you, is that you're very big on setting standards for yourself. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think goals, as we spoke about, can sometimes be overwhelming and suck people. And so for me, sometimes a goal is like, so when you get to a goal, it's done. What do you do then? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, oh, well, I've gotten to that now, so I can just let that go. Whereas if you set yourself a standard, it's more of a lifelong thing. It's enduring, life enduring. It lasts forever. So for me, it's all about just setting standards of behavior, standards of communication, standards of income projection. It's all about setting something that's going to continue. It's not going to end. There's no end date to it. So creating that culture of behavior, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Like behavior to live by versus when I get the goal, then, like you said, what's next? I think it's the same in the industry that I'm in as well, in the health and fitness side of things. It's like when you hit your goal, it's not like you go back to just eating and exercising
100%.
or not exercising the way you were before. It's like now you set that standard for how that type of person does it. And essentially that embeds your identity as well.
Yes.
So another big aspect that I go through a lot of my clients is that we're not going back to anywhere. Yes, this goal provides us with a framework and a direction that we want to go in.
Yes.
But you're kind of setting a standard to live by. So I like that as well. It ties into the identity side of things. So for people who maybe find that a little bit like, I've never been the type of person who's been healthy before. I've never been someone who's run a business. I've got a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, but I have no experience here. Where do you encourage them with getting started in terms of creating those standards for themselves?
So I think you have to start by setting good habits each day, because as a business owner, as you know, every day is different. You can't predict what's going to happen. You are 100% going to come across challenges and obstacles along the way. So you have to continually work on your mindset and your resilience and your ability to shift directions if need be. A good business owner has to be all about connection. So it's working on your ability to, connect with people and that sort of thing. But I think also if you are wanting to go into the business ownership world and things like that, it's about having a clear direction. You talked about having a direction to get to where you want to be. You've got to know where you're starting from and where you're going to. So I think that's probably the number one for me, is to work out your purpose. Why do you want to do it? Because sometimes you need to go back to that when it gets really hard. And why am I doing this? It's knowing your purpose. It's knowing exactly what you want, why you want it, and where you want to end up from it, what it's going to do for your life, how it's going to change everything.
Yeah, I like that. Direction and connection. That's going to be easy for a lot of people to remember as well.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to now find and use your experience in the place that you are today. Of course, we know that hindsight is 2020. So if you could go back to your early 20s and you could go speak to that much younger version of Marnie and say, hey, these are the type of things that you need to look out for along the way, or you could basically live that version of yourself with the experience you have today, what things would you have done differently?
First of all, I would be telling myself to trust my gut throughout that sale.
It's a good learning.
Massive learning. I live by it now, but it's taken a long time for me to get to that point. So, there's a lot of decisions and things that I made throughout that sale, and I took on board the requests and things from the purchaser of the business and advice from other people and things like that, which wasn't a wet against the grain for me. I have always had a very good connection with all of my staff, and I have always brought them into decision making with the business and things like that, to a degree, obviously. And I'm always open to learning from them and getting their opinions and ideas and perspectives on stuff that we do as a business and as we grow. And at the time, one of the triggers for, the court case and that sort of thing was the fact that I was asked not to tell the staff about the sale, to keep it confidential for a number of reasons, which were quite valid reasons. But obviously my accountant sent a letter to the office and didn't mark it private and confidential, and it was outlining the sale. And so they found out. And then that was what pretty much, obviously they were very angry and very upset. And then they went straight to the franchisor. And then obviously that kind of triggered the whole situation, which may have not been so volatile if I had been able to. I had told him I was wanting to sell, but I think the fact that he kind of found out from then that it actually gone through and things like that. So I would definitely say trust your instincts, go with your gut, be true to yourself. It doesn't matter what other people expect of you or ask you to do. At the end of the day, we are the only ones that really are able to control our decisions and things like that. And we should make decisions based around what's best for us and the people that we're trying to protect. I think the other thing is to remember that there's always another day and things will always get better, because when you're in the midst of all that stuff, it's very hard to think about the future. And so I think that's another thing. And also to be more confident in speaking my truth and saying no. I'm a people pleaser, and I've literally spent my life taking responsibility for other people's happiness, and I hate confrontation, so I avoid it like the plague. But sometimes we need to confront things. We need to be able to speak up and say what we're feeling and say what we're thinking, and not just go with the flow. I think most of the anxiety I've felt over the years is because I've, not been able to say no to things. So I say yes to everything. I want to be there for everybody. And then I set such big boundaries and expectations from other people. I set them basically and then I can't live up to them. And then I feel like I've failed people. So I would say, yeah, all those things are things that have come with years and years and years of introspection and learning and failures and wins and all that sort of stuff. So going back to my 20s, 100%, I would be telling myself to do more of that.
Yeah, I love that. And like I said, hindsight is so 2020. And I think there's one big thing that I take away from the conversation that we're having right now is the amount of introspection that you actually do.
Yes.
There are so many people who, and this may be the reason why we're having this conversation, the reason why you're able to build yourself up to successes once again and release a book, etc., is because you had that introspection. And like you said, I'm not going to make these mistakes again. if I get through this, I'm going to be able to fly with these new businesses and everything that I create off the back of that as well.
Yeah.
So what is your process of introspection? What has allowed you to become so self-aware? Because I think reflection is a big missing piece of society, and a lot of people at this moment in time, we make these mistakes over and over again, and we wonder why we're in the same position. And I think reflection and introspection is the missing key. So how have you been able to cultivate that in your life, and what specific practices do you use, if you use any, to get yourself into a position where you do deeply know yourself?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I've learned over the years is when I look back, so most people, when they look back, they look at the pain and look at the things that didn't go right. It's just, I don't know why, but it's just a thing. I mean, some people do look back at the good times, but rather than looking back on all of those challenges that I've faced as painful things and things that didn't work and as failures and all that kind of stuff, now what I do is I force myself to look at the strength that I got from them. So I look back and I go, you know what? Yeah, that was hard, but I made it through. And if I can make it through that, then I can make it through the next thing. I can make it through anything pretty much if I made it through that year. Let's face it. So
2005 was one for the books, right?
Yeah, 100%. So I think that's something that, I've always recently, not always, sorry, tried to really focus on is looking back at the good things that have come from it, the learnings from it. But it's only been in recent years that I've started to do some more mindfulness stuff. Exercise has always been a thing for me. I've always used exercise as my release. It's like my antidepressant basically. And I've always scheduled exercise into my day. So that's something that I always do. And that's definitely helped. But I think the introspection thing has really just come from, so when I sold my agencies in early 2018, I went to a stage where I was just completely lost because I had spent my life focusing on other people. I'd spent my life focusing on staff, clients, kids, family, everything besides me. And so I forced myself to take some time out. And I think that that's where I really started to do the introspection thing. I think you need to sometimes remove yourself from situations in order to understand and be able to look at them differently, because when you're stuck in situations that you're busy and your mind's going 100 mile an hour and you're still doing the day-to-day stuff, it's hard. So, even if business owners find it hard to get holidays, for example, but even to take yourself to a retreat for a week, every year or every 6 months, and to do mindfulness stuff like meditations and yoga and all of that sort of thing, that's what's really given me that, I think, that real understanding of what I've been through and why I've done some things that I've done and what I've learned from it and how I want to then implement that into my life moving forward. Because I don't think there's ever a finish line for me. I'm always looking for new opportunities and new things. And all my friends say to me all the time, why don't you just retire and go and lay on a beach? And I just can't do that. Oh, I wish I could. But, I think introspection comes from looking at things differently, looking at things more in a positive light as to, how resilient you've been through those challenges and taking the time to really acknowledge it, because you can't do it when you're in the thick of it. So
no, and I think that
helps.
2020 proved that to so many people, right?
Yeah.
They were forced to slow down, and obviously you got it 2 years in advance and got the opportunity to kind of get that introspection and reflection. But I think a lot of people can resonate with it because of so many people started doing their career changes. They were starting to realize that I actually don't have any hobbies, or I don't like this relationship I'm in, or I don't really like who I am on a day-to-day basis, and all these big deep reflections that came in. So I like that a lot because of that was forced.
Yes.
In a certain sense, we had to slow down. But wouldn't it be amazing if we did that from a kind of kind and gentle and loving space versus, life's probably, hopefully not going to stop us like that again, although it was very, very valuable for many people.
Yeah.
So I think that, having the consciousness to slow yourself down, it doesn't have to be for long, but just long enough for you to be able to, like I said, just switch off for a bit and listen to the intuition and the inner voice versus the what do I need to do today and what things do I need to do to tick off my list, right?
Totally. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And something you said there in terms of never slowing down, I'm always very curious, especially for people who have, gone through decades of experience and have no intentions of slowing down. I feel that very within myself as well. And, I'm still relatively young. So I feel that, that's long into the future when I need to worry about am I ever going to be truly satisfied, or will I ever be content with retirement, et cetera, et cetera. So do you feel that that is going to be the right approach to you to continue to looking for new things to do? And do you feel that it brings you true happiness?
I think it does bring me happiness because I'm very, so one, I'm very spontaneous. Two, I get bored easily. So I'm always looking for new things to do and new things to, adventure, all that kind of stuff. So I think it does bring me happiness to be doing new things all the time and to be building things. I think that is in line with what I love to do as a person. I like to build things. I like to create, things that I know are going to help other people. So yeah, I think it does bring me happiness. And I don't know, the whole question of when is enough and when will you be satisfied? That's something that I do ask myself, I have to say, because I do. So my dad, when he passed away, he was in the process of selling his business. So in the process of selling their home and all that kind of stuff. So he didn't get a chance to do all of those things in retirement that he had wanted to do. So I'm obviously very mindful of that as well. So now what I'm trying to do is intersperse all of those fun things and travel and adventure and, doing all those spontaneous things that I kind of have always done, but actually really enjoying them now. So it's a bit of both. Yeah, it's a bit of both. I just don't think I'm the type of person that can just sit and just not do anything. It's just not in my nature. So, but I'm managing it. I'm setting up things like online programs and the app and stuff like that that's going to continue to produce that passive income. But I still feel like I'm in the game and, adding benefit and value to people. That's what makes me
Yeah,
big.
I like
Yeah.
that a lot. It's like you're transitioning through the different phases of your life and kind
Yeah.
of pulling a little bit of this, like when you're in your 20s or 30s, for example, maybe it was the hyper focus on work and doing your best to look after your girls as well.
Mhm.
But now it's a sense of, continuing to do that, not necessarily needing to people please or prove to the world that you're good enough or you're successful enough, but is now saying, okay, what do I have a deep interest in?
Yes.
And doing it from a place of, yeah, I love this and I want to continue integrating it, but I can also take a bit of this, a bit of spontaneous nature of traveling, of yoga, and all these other type of things, which sounds like you're finding a much more balanced approach, which is optimistic for someone like myself to hear, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's definitely a much more balanced approach. So
And what compelled you to write a book at this stage in your journey as well?
writing has always been my thing. I was going to be a journalist, so I don't know how I fell from journalism to accounting and then to real estate. But anyway, I have had a goal since I was in high school. I've wanted to write a book. So last year, at the beginning of the year, I don't set resolutions. I just set like an action plan for me for the year. And last year, I made the decision that I was going to write the book because, as I said, it had been in the back of my mind for a long time. And, those close to me that know what I have been through and stuff have said to me for years, you need to write a book. And so I set about writing a different book, which I will continue. So there is another book coming eventually. And that was
That's good to know.
more about the industry and the things that they don't tell you. And it's quite a satirical look at real estate and the funny things that happen and the hard things. But I had a publisher who reached out to me about that book and we started to talk and she sort of said, tell me a bit more about your background. So I started to tell her a few things and she was the one that said to me, Marnie, this is the book you need to write about. This is the story that needs to be out there first because it sets that groundwork for the next book, which will give you, the leverage and the credibility for people to understand that, you can help. So, yeah, so it kind of came about, like that. It was actually a big shift and, again, an opportunity down a different road that I hadn't thought about because, you write about yourself or you talk about yourself, you don't know whether people are going to actually care or have any interest.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
I went 2 stages writing it thinking, oh gosh, what are people going to be thinking when they read all this? And there's things in there that I haven't told. There's a couple of things in there that I hadn't even verbalized until one thing in particular until the book, which was a little bit daunting. And I had to tell my daughters a couple of things before the book came out. So the night before the launch, I was just putting
Oh, wow.
building up and having to tell them a couple of things, only because I knew that it would concern them and stuff. So anyway, so yeah, that the goal to write a book has been there for a long time, but to write that book was only a recent thing. And I wrote that book in like 3 months. So I think because it's you and it's stuff it just flowed, which was great. Yeah. I felt like it was time.
Did anything surprise you during the process of writing?
Surprise me about the book or just the actual doing it?
The introspections and the writing, getting it all out on paper, because I can imagine it was like one giant journal entry.
That's pretty much what it was. And a reviewer who actually wrote the book said to me, it's like a fascinating look into somebody's personal diary.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, it was emotional. It was cathartic. It was a whole range of things, but it definitely, when we talk about that introspection, I'd had a lot of it in the 2 years before, but I think writing the book gave me the biggest insight into what I've actually been able to overcome, what I've been through, and how much it's made me grow as a person, and how it's developed, I guess, my skills over the years, which were very much leadership, business, real estate, all that kind of stuff. Whereas now I feel like I've got so much more to give from, that whole mindset, resilience side that I've never really even thought about sharing with people. So it's actually really exciting. And I love, for me, the main thing that I get out, the joy that I get out of this book is how much it inspires people and encourages people. That's been awesome, the sort of feedback I've been getting on that.
It's a beautiful transition, it truly is. And what is the impact that you now want to have on the world with the work that you do?
I just want people to know and understand that there's nothing really that can stop you unless you let it. So I believe that we're our only limiting factor, and life is truly about perception. So we have a choice at how we look at things, and it doesn't matter what happens to you. It's your choice as to what you do with that and how you move forward from it. So I just want people to know that, and there's always somebody out there to help you through that too. I think I've always been an inward thinker. I've always been an overthinker. I've always been one of those people that, as I said at the beginning, I bottle everything up. I give it to myself because I don't want to burden anybody else with my problems. But I think that one thing I have learned over the years, and and even writing this book, is by putting stuff out there and actually asking for help when you need it. It's truly important because, some things and some of the health issues that I've had over the years, I think if I had asked for help earlier on and opened up to people more, then I don't think that I would have had to go through a lot of that stuff. But again, that's a hindsight thing. So it's okay to ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, and you can share those learnings now, and hopefully someone else takes those on board, right? And one final quote that I want to go through, and I'm not even going to try and memorize it. I'm going to literally read it because I don't want to butcher it, because it's that good, that you put on one of your Instagram captions that I want you to speak on, is that you said, if you're wondering whether the glass is half empty or half full, you're missing the point. The glass is refillable. Yeah. I love that quote. What did you mean by that? Tell us a little bit more about that, because it's the first time I've heard it, surprisingly.
Well, people always categorize people's personalities and their drive on whether the glass is half empty or the glass is half full, whether you look at things in a positive mindset or you look at things in a negative mindset. But for me, it doesn't really matter, because the choice is yours. If you want to refill the glass, you refill the glass and it's full. And the glass could be full all the time if you choose for it to be full all the time. It's up to us to find ways to continually refill our cup, whether that be exercise, whether that be learning, whether that be, mindfulness, no matter what it is, it's our decision. We don't have to look at it as half empty or half full.
Yeah, it's very nice. And what you touched on earlier, in sense of the introspection and not looking at it as, what did I do wrong and how can I not do this wrong again? It's that same perspective of like, okay, this wasn't a pleasant situation, but I'm going to look at it from the perspective of saying, okay, well, this can serve me, and how can it serve me as well? So I think that ties in nicely to what you mentioned earlier too.
Yeah, perception.
Amazing. Marnie, this has been a truly awesome conversation.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that the listeners will want to dive deep into your book, get some of those insights that maybe we didn't touch on today, some of those things that you had to tell your daughters in advance, which I'm sure sparked a lot of curiosity as well. So can you let us know where the best place is to find you, your book, and just keep up with everything that you're doing?
Sure. So my website's marniebeauchamp.com. And the book is on Amazon, and it will be distributed into bookstores in the next, I think, 4 to 6 weeks. But at the moment, you can certainly buy the paperback or the ebook on Amazon, our Barnes & Noble if you're in the States. And the audiobook, I am in the process of uploading that at the moment. There's a little bit of a struggle with Audible. Being from Australia, apparently we can't upload audiobooks from here.
It's interesting.
Anyway, so yeah, so I'm trying to work through that. But yes, the audiobook should be there in the next week or two. But I do have a website for the book, so that's unreadpagesbook.com, and that will link you straight to purchase the book online.
Amazing. We'll make sure all of that is in the show notes below. But Marnie, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a super insightful and a super interesting conversation. Thank you so much.
So glad. Thank you for having me.